Once upon a time, there was a magical fire fairy called Freyja Fairy. She lived in the woods, in the mushroom village, with all her friends. Sydney the gnome, Mr. Badger, Roxy the foxy, Gerald the hedgehog, and his best friend, Wiggly the worm, Duncan the dwarf, and Lavender fairy. One day, Freyja was busy picking wild flowers when she heard her friend, Mr. Badger, crying.
"What is the matter, Mr. Badger? Why are you crying?"
asked Freyja. "The horrible giants have stolen my family, and I may never see them again," said Badger in a weepy voice.
"We must rescue them, Mr. Badger, before the leader of the giants, Crazy Cameron, tries to keep them away from their woodland homes,"
replied Freyja. The Badger said, "Climb on my back, and I will take you to the land of the giants, a land of molten lava and volcanoes. We'll have to be careful that we don't get burnt." The fire fairy giggled at this, threw her magic fiery sparkles over the badger, and climbed upon his back, saying,
"We will use the magic of the pixies to keep us safe from the fire."
The magic badger raced off at a full pelt, ducking and diving, leaping and bounding through the undergrowth. Freyja knew it was time to fly to the giant's land, and flapped her wings very fast. She could not lift the badger off the ground. She tried again, but still couldn't lift him. The cliff edge at the border of the woods was getting nearer. So she needed to fly, and she needed to fly now. The only thing she could do was plead to the children in the human world. If there was enough belief in fairies, it would help her fairy magic lift the badger. She prayed to the children.
"Please, boys and girls, do you believe? If you do, shout, 'I believe in fairies,' now, quickly, before the cliff edge gets too near."
Freyja breathed a sigh of relief, as just in the nick of time, the badger was lifted off the woodland floor with a flap of her wings.
"Oh, thank you, my sweet friends,"
she thought, as they soared through the air at great speed. They lifted high into the air beyond the clouds. Freyja loved flying above the clouds, as they always reminded her of fluffy marshmallows, but she resisted the urge to stop and snuggle up on a comfy white cloud. Before the friends knew it, they were at the gap in the clouds, which leads to the giant's kingdom. They sailed through the gap to see a beautiful green forest down below, with the biggest of the volcanoes rising up and up. Beyond the volcanoes there were molten lava rivers flowing across the land. Badger and Freyja started to come into land, taking great care not to crash into the huge pine trees. The air was very hot and humid, like they'd flown into an oven. The whole place smelled like burning rubber and coal fires. As they landed, Freyja said,
"Here, Badger, I think you're going to need more pixie dust,"
and sprinkled the badger with her magical fire sprite dust once again. Badger spluttered, "Thank you," and then gave a sneeze as the powder had got up his nose. Freyja and Badger cautiously looked round the mysterious land and realised just how big and scary everything was. There were lots of strange noises, and Badger knew something was watching them from the shadows. They heard a bubbling from a volcano, and occasionally a shower of hot ash shot out of the top of it. Badger set out to forage in the greenery for a grub or two to eat, in order to get his strength back, when he heard a strange rustling. "Who's there?" snorted Mr. Badger in a gruff voice. "Come out and show yourself, before I come to get you," Badger demanded. A Jamaican-sounding voice shouted out from the undergrowth, "What do you want, man? Me just catching some rays." Then out of the bushes scurried the most peculiar-looking dragon that Freyja had ever seen. And believe me, Freyja had seen some strange creatures during her travels. "Hello there. My name is Desmond, and Miss been watching you to see what you're doing," announced the small green dragon, whilst flicking his dreadlocks out of his eyes. Freyja had heard about the Rasta dragon from the faraway lands, and knew that he was friendly with everyone, and that he simply couldn't be bothered with any fighting or badness. Badger told Desmond about his missing family, and Desmond told them both that the badgers had been stolen from all the badger sets all over the country, since Crazy Cameron had gained power and had them all locked up in a dungeon beyond the lava lakes. Desmond informed Freyja and Badger of the terrible creature that guards the gateway to the lava lair of the giants, a vicious moggy by the name of Alanis the Wonder Cat, with claws like razor blades, sword-like teeth, and a grumpiness to match her terrible disposition. Thought Freyja.
We must be cunning and get this kitty on our side.
She turned to Desmond and asked a very strange request.
Can we have one of your magical dreadlocks, please?
Desmond looked puzzled, then said, "Of course you can, but you best be on your way now, as there isn't a lot of time." And with that, he plucked one of his dreads out of his head and handed it to Freyja. They said their goodbyes and were on their way, walking through the jungle on their track to the gateway. Soon they approached a small river with stepping stones across it. Freyja said she would go first, and when she reached the middle stone, she dangled the dreadlock into the water. Badger scratched his head. He was very puzzled now, and thought Freyja very strange. Freyja shouted,
"Got one!"
and pulled the dreadlock up out of the water to reveal a fish flapping away. Freyja then informed the badger.
Now we have something to bargain with.
The badger smiled. What a clever sprite, he thought. They crossed the stepping stones and continued to follow the path. Then, in no time at all, they were at the volcano entrance. They proceeded with great caution, as they could not see the grumpy cat, which may spring out at any time. They started to make their way into the cave, with their hearts beating so fast they could hear the thumping in their ears. It was dark in the cave, but it seemed to glisten like sparkles. Then they saw the cat jump out of the darkness, growling and hissing. Two bright yellow eyes soon revealed who they belonged to, as Freyja and Badger's eyes adjusted to the darkness. It was the dreaded Alanis. She spat and hissed at the friends as she arched her back in a menacing manner. Freyja was scared, but still came forward and put the fish in front of Alanis, saying,
"Mighty Alanis, please take this fish as our gift and allow us passage to the giant's world."
Then the cat unarched her back and sat down. Beginning to purr, she started to eat the fish. Freyja and Badger decided it was their cue to move forward. Alanis just looked up, continued purring, and then looked down at the fish. The friends moved through the cave swiftly, following the light that showed their way out. When Freyja and Badger reached the end of the cave and looked out onto the land, They gasped at the vastness of the place, so big and so fiery. There were wicked-looking bare trees, all crooked and looking like they were dying, steaming holes in the earth that occasionally spat out hot water into the air, and small gullies everywhere, containing hot molten lava. Freyja felt at home amongst all the fire, but she could see that Badger was somewhat worried. She put her arm round him and reassured him that all would be well. They would have to be swift as they crossed the land, as it was open with very few places to hide from the terrible giants and the horrible ogres that were often found in this fiery dwelling. As they ran and jumped over the obstacles, they kept a sharp eye out for the creatures and for where the rest of the badgers were being held captive in the dungeon. They ran and ran until they were gasping for breath, then stopped by a crooked tree to get their breath back. Just then they heard giant footsteps, and the friends hid quickly behind the tree as the herd of giants came rumbling across the landscape, taking huge steps that made a noise like thunder. Crash, bang, crash, bang went their footsteps, and then a roar as one of the giants spoke to the others. "We just need one more," he bellowed. "Then all the badgers will be ours forever." Badger gave a shudder as he knew that the giant was talking about him. With that, the whole pack of giants bounded across the land towards the gate.
"Oh dear,"
said Freyja in a whisper.
"How are we going to get past the badgers?"
With that, the whole pack of giants bounded across the land towards the gate.
"Oh dear,"
said Freyja in a whisper. "I'm sure you'll think of something, being a clever, magical sprite," whispered Badger back, and quickly scampered off in the direction of the next caves leading to the volcano, which was spitting the molten lava out to feed all the little gullies. Freyja followed, running as fast as her little legs could carry her. When Badger got to the volcano entrance, he waited for Freyja and said, "Do you think this is where the dungeon is?" Freyja looked in the passage and said,
"Yes, it must be, as the passage leads down."
The Badger replied, "We must follow it then." He sniffed the air. "The badgers are here," he said with a smile on his face. It was dark in the passageway, which was okay for Mr. Badger, as he was a night animal, but Freyja needed to see where she was going. She found a big stick and held it to her mouth, gave a small hiccup, and with that a small ball of fire lit the end of the stick. Down and down the passageway went, leading to a room with a big cage in it, and in that cage were all the badgers, all crammed in together. It was a sorry sight to see. A large badger, who was curled up with the others, sleepily looked up and saw Mr. Badger and Freyja. She squealed in delight and awoke all the other badgers, who jumped up in surprise. Freyja announced,
"We have come to get you out of here."
She looked at the door to see two bolts, which just slid open, but there was also a lock which needed a key. Badger looked round the room, and to his surprise saw that the key was hanging on a hook very high on the wall. "Giants aren't very clever, are they?" he said, and then flew upwards to retrieve it. He threw it to Freyja. She quickly unlocked the gate, and the badgers filed out in a line, one by one. Just then, Freyja heard a shout that sounded very like a growl. "Grrr. What are you doing? I'll gobble you up, you pesky sprite." It was the ogre who Freyja had come across before, called George. He was very bad-tempered and angry, because he was a short ogre, so the other giants always made fun of him. Freyja didn't give George any more time to say or do anything else. She threw a big handful of her sparkles at him, which made his ugly face smile. He said, "This way, my lovelies," holding out his arm and motioning for the group to pass him.
"Why, thank you, kind sir,"
said Freyja, and blew him a kiss. The group of badgers rushed through the passage together with Freyja and out to the giant's land. They ran and ran, but before getting to the gateway cave, the rumbling of giants' footsteps echoed and boomed through the air. Crazy Cameron bellowed, "The badgers are escaping!" Freyja took a deep breath, then blew her magical fire, and out came a circle of flame, which Freyja threw sparkles into and opened up a portal to the land back home. Freyja shouted,
"Quick, badgers, jump in!"
and all the badgers began to enter the portal, all except one baby badger who was crying because he was so frightened. Freyja quickly picked him up, and with a running jump leaped through the portal.
"Phew,"
said Freyja, as she landed with a thump. Then all of the fairies came out to greet her, and the badgers. They clapped and cheered that the badgers were home safe again. But as the applause faded, all that could be heard was the bellowing sound of Crazy Cameron. "We're on our way to get you, you pesky sprite and bothersome badger," he was shouting. "Don't think you can escape this time." The badgers, shaking with fright, began burrowing underground, and all the fey folk scurried away, all except Freyja, Mr. Badger, and the baby badger. She tried to get the baby badger to go underground, but he simply would not leave, as she was trying to get him to hide. Crazy Cameron loomed over them all and held his big club, made of molten rock, up into the air, ready to smash them. And so he flew up to the giant's head, gripped hold of the back of his head and covered his eyes. This almost tipped Crazy Cameron backwards, and his club came down with a smash right on another giant's head. Then Crazy Cameron took another blind swing, this time hitting two other giants on their knees, which made the giants hug and hop on their legs. Alanis the Wonder Cat ran into the fairy circle, pounced like no ordinary cat could pounce, and knocked the giant off his feet, which made the badger jump off just as Crazy Cameron hit the ground. Just then, Duncan the dwarf emerged from his mushroom house, grumpily shouting, "What's all this noise about? I'm trying to sleep." Then he suddenly saw the cat and asked her in cat language what was going on as he walked towards her. Duncan had not seen a cat in a long time, but having grown up with a kitten litter, he could speak and understand cat language fluently. Alanis meowed a reply to Duncan, and Duncan nodded his head. Then he approached Crazy Cameron, who was still laid on the floor, took out his hammer and held it near to the giant's head, and shouted that if the giants ever returned to the place where the badgers lived, they would not only have Alanis to deal with, but also him. Freyja stepped forward and said,
"And me."
Mr. Badger stepped forward and said the same. And with that, all of the Fae came out of hiding and stepped forward, saying, "We're not scared of you anymore. Never return." Crazy Cameron got up onto his feet and ran, followed by the crying giants. Alanis meowed again at Duncan, and Duncan said, "Of course you can live here, if it's all right with Freyja." Alanis walked over to Freyja, pushed her head against her, and started to purr. Freyja looked up at the cat and said, smiling,
"Of course you can stay, our new friend."
And of course, all the friends lived happily ever after.
Through the moss the ivies creep, there is sweet music, soft and falls, the between walls and shadowy credits in a gleaming glass. And here across his teeth